I had a conversation with my boss finally today, right? And then I was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest with you. This might be a tough conversation. Like, do you have the appetite right now to have this conversation? I asked him that first. And he was like, I appreciate you asking that. Like, let's just have it. You clearly have something going on in your head.
Yeah.
And then after sort of setting the tone that way, I was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest with you. You promised me XYZ things. I think it's time for me to ask for that, right? So he was like, oh, I was planning on, I had this plan for you, like towards the end of this year, in my mind, like, is that okay? And I was like I would have normally shied away from it. I would have been like, oh yeah. It's like go overboard and say like you're like so happy about whatever they're suggesting to you, just because you feel like that's being polite. And I hate confrontation, right? I'm so non-confrontational. But for some reason at that moment, I was like, man, I gotta like get out of this cycle, right? I gotta just ask more, right? I gotta demand. Sometimes you just gotta be demanding. So I'm like, hey, like I just want like a clearer date. I just want it to happen sooner. And then he was actually surprisingly very receptive. So I mean, like that conversation alone, I mean, none of it really, it will still take time for all that to come into fruition. And I need more like concrete dates and stuff like that. It's in the works, but like, he would have not known, right? Had I not brought it up. And it's not necessarily like a problem of him having bad intentions or anything. It's more like being more direct in communications and stuff like that. But the reason I'm sorry, I'm going a little long with the story here, but like the point that I'm trying to make is the same thing could have been applied to this last relationship that I was talking about, right?
Hello, welcome back to another episode
of Adulting and Adrift. This week we are talking about regrets, all of them.
And there are many.
Yeah, there are many. Yeah, I mean, we're trying out, new topics. I mean, I think last one I actually got a lot of good feedback on this, actually, from my friends and also some of my coworkers. They were like, oh, I really like all of them were like, I like the fact that it wasn't like a very serious topic, as in like it's kind of like a collection of many different topics, right?
Okay.
We weren't talking about like one thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And also just trying to edit and go into short form content a little more. I mean, I have my own like philosophical reservations against short form. But
yeah, we literally had an episode about it.
Yeah, but I'm giving in. I feel like that's a good way to catch people's attention. And it's like, I don't know, maybe cut it into different pieces by topic. But anyways, I'm thinking about all these things. So we should talk about growth strategy at some point too.
That's true. All right. So where should we begin?
Okay.
What do you regret most in life? No, let's not start there. We can work our way up to that.
Well,
do you regret anything?
Oh yeah, a lot of things. Are you kidding me? Yeah, a lot of things. I feel like most people have like one major single regret, I think.
Well, some people say they have no regrets. Some people say, it's like, yeah, I made mistakes, but I learned from them, so I don't regret anything, because even the things that were stupid and were clearly mistakes ended up putting you on a better trajectory because you learned from that mistake. So, I can see that.
It's all about interpretations, huh? Too.
So let's not worry too much about the fine-grained definition.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can sort of take a, regret. It doesn't have to mean you would necessarily, wish that had never happened.
Right.
Right? It just mean like something maybe negative that you would give advice to someone in a similar situation.
Yeah,
perhaps,
I like that approach.
You might do things differently if you knew otherwise, right? But I think it's totally valid. Like, first of all, I just want to say, like, many people, like, you have to make mistakes. You're not going to learn if you don't make any mistakes.
Right.
So a regret is not just a mistake, I guess. I think what we want to talk about is perhaps like patterns of thinking, or flaws in our just general approach to life, or to friendships or relationships or whatever, that looking back we sort of recognize as a flawed pattern, and we might just advise someone in that situation to just caution them against that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it. But do you have I don't know, what do you think?
No, that's a great angle. If the listeners, if any of our stories you find relatable, right, you're going through right now, then and if this podcast could serve the purpose of them finding gathering some wisdom from our conversation, then I think that's perfect.
Cool.
That serves the right purpose. I have some themes in my notes. I have relationship. I have job. For me, for you, that's going to be, grad school program.
Yeah.
Or actually you could talk about your, if you're teaching experience in Florida as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, school. And then lastly, family as well. Family is also always just, one of the toughest ones to talk about. But any of these you want to begin with, Thomas?
They all sound
you
good to
don't.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be the first person to go, but which of these themes do you want to sort of hit first? I have a little bit for everything, I think.
Do you have a preference?
Mm,
I'm kind of curious about college. I feel like that's
Yeah.
like an interesting time.
yeah.
But if the other things sort of come up
no,
along
let's
the
do
way,
college.
yeah.
Let's
Okay,
do
go ahead.
college.
So yeah, I don't know.
And let me also actually take a step back and expand this to school in general.
Yeah.
Right?
It could be high
School.
school. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be high school.
I keep forgetting we went to the same high school, bro.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a clear like difference between me and Thomas though, right? Like I think Thomas was really thriving in high school. But anyways,
Okay. Speak for yourself, bro.
I think I was. I mean, again, look, it makes sense, right? I came to the States for the first time. I was trying to like assimilate. I was too scared and often very shy to try out things. I think just like one thing that comes into my mind is sports, right? I think I would have tried out definitely more sports, like in, prep year, like just like tryouts and stuff. If I don't like it, then, I don't have to stick with it, but I would have definitely tried more. I think my prep year, freshman year, I had this like this preconceived notion, which wasn't correct, that like I had to, in order to survive in high school, I have to go all in on studies. And I thought sports was just like detrimental to my studies. You know what I mean? But it's like, it's oftentimes those extracurricular activities that really enriches your time in school, especially boarding schools and stuff like that. And I feel like whenever I go back to reunions, right? I mean, I don't have the most friends, right? I mean, I go back to reunions and like see, sports team people hanging out. And I'm like, damn, I could have had more communities in school. But again, I think friendship, just the quality matters more than quantity too. So I mean, there are different things here at play. But I'm not necessarily, the reason I bring the friends thing up is like I have more regrets about me not trying out different things, not like regrets about like me not having more friends. That's not the regret that I'm going for. But like if you like, Thomas was a great runner. Like I tried track a little bit, but I didn't stick with it. Like music also, I was pretty good at it. And I did a lot of like orchestra and stuff like that. I didn't really stick with it throughout college, especially when I came back from service. Like I just totally stopped playing music. It's like those things, like you got to try out so many different things when you're young to see which one sticks with you, right? It's like a process of elimination thing. So if I were to go back in time and tell a young Kihong, the first day in school, arriving at campus, I would be like, just be more shameless. Try out different things. Yeah.
How do you think the choices you made like affected your time in high school or even down the line in college or beyond?
Yeah, I don't want to lose any of it, right? But what I mean by that is even the failures and even the moments which I think has left like a permanently negative mark in my, let's say, personality or something like that, I think still every single one of them in and of itself is valuable to me, right? Who I am right now, I don't want to change anything about it. I can say that with confidence. But like, for example, right? I mean, one regret example that comes into my mind is like, like your parents will tell you a lot of things before you go to like, especially like a boarding school. They're like, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Like my mom heard from like one of my Korean friends' moms that like you got to do like a math club or something like that to be successful. I don't know, get into a good college or whatever. Like I look at me, I'm not like a math club guy. Okay, I still remember I went to the first meeting. I was just like sitting there. I was like, what the hell is going on, right? Like I don't know any of these things that these guys are talking about. Mr. Fung, the math teacher, he was so scary. I love Claudia, so if Claudia's listening, no offense to you, Claudia, but your dad's scary. And I remember how I would just dread going to math clubs, like every Sunday meeting. But still, I forced myself to do it. But like, why? I would have much rather just like, I don't know, hung out and like even just like playing video games with my friends in my dorm would have been a better use of my time. I'm not shitting on the math club itself. It was just not a good fit for me, right? And I was not happy. You do have to pursue happiness. Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like, I do wonder, like, how would your life have been different if
Oh yeah, that was your question.
you
Yeah.
had done these things that you regret?
Yeah,
Or
it might
sorry,
have been more.
yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I get it. I might have been more physically tired, but I think I would have left school with more things in my like more tools in my belt,
Yeah.
right? Like more skill sets. Um, and I think my life currently would have been more like richer, right? Like
Mhm.
there's some friends of mine who like never played tennis before, for example, and then like discovered tennis in school, and then now they still like play tennis after work and stuff like that. Like that's awesome, right? Having hobbies. Let me tell you, adult life is lonely, right? Like having hobbies is so important. Um, and it's like you're always so tired after work. You have to force yourself, but like you can definitely do things that you like. You will muster up the power to do it if you love it.
If you love it, yeah, and you
Right?
have like a community around it.
Exactly,
And,
exactly. But how are you going to find that out unless you've tried?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. So there's something to be said for just exploring a lot and trying a
Explore.
bunch of different stuff, even if
Yes.
a lot of it doesn't stick
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. Explore. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, sorry, well, I'll say one last thing about school, and then I'll pass over the we'll tag team here. But especially like like high school, high school teens can be mean, right? There will obviously be like XYZ remarks thrown at you, especially me being an Asian person and an international person. It can be remarks about my race. It could be remarks about my like broken English, for example. And these are clearly personal examples that I went through, right? It's like don't let those bother you so much, right? But like I can only say that now in retrospect, right? And looking back, obviously it's tough. But I mean, if any of our listeners has friends who are going through it, like whose family, like younger, family members going through any of those like kind of like mental, problems, it's just like I would say just take a step back, right? Take a step back, zoom out, look at your life, look at just look at the things that really matter. Prioritize. Even when it comes to friends, prioritize quality over quantity. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All
My
right,
turn?
Thomas.
High school, or
Yeah, high school. I mean, let's do college. I can
Or no,
also
high
speak a little
school's
bit
fine.
about
Alright.
yeah, high school or college, anything.
I think I hinted at this in some earlier episodes, right? But I think high school was a time when I had my priorities not fully right. So I cared a lot about grades. I cared a lot about sort of esteem and
Yeah.
affirmation and sort of these things, right? So I think inherently, it's not bad to care about your grades, right? It's good to care a little bit, but it's a matter of priorities.
Yeah.
And I don't think my priorities were always in the right place. So I think there's sort of multiple things that I would sort of qualify as regrets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's sort of being so obsessive about like one very narrow aspect
Yeah.
of the experience, which is, trying to be the best, trying to, get these tangible markers and signals of success. We talked about a bit of this in the status anxiety episode. We talked a bit about it in talking about high school, right? But so much of it is like posturing and signaling. And I think, fine, easy for me to say that like, oh, that stuff wasn't really that important when, it does kind of maybe help you get into college and that kind of stuff. But I think over the course of high school, I shifted my emphasis a bit, hopefully in the right direction. I remember just like my first year, like prep year in high school, it being, I don't know, just like very much about, oh, I want people to like recognize me for being smart. And I'm not super close friends with anyone that I was friends with like in my prep year. And I think it's because I wasn't really being a good friend. I wasn't like really there to be curious about the person, get that deeper friendship I sort of wanted to have. I wanted to be part of something. I wanted to be part of a group. I wanted people to like me. But I think my closer one-on-one, deeper friendships only emerged sort of later, going through tough times with people. But I think part of that is natural, right? So, I don't think it makes sense to fully change things, but I do think I entered high school with, being mature for my age in certain ways, like having read a lot of books and knowing a lot in certain academic dimensions, but also being in some ways quite sheltered and not having that much in terms of emotional intelligence or social skills. spent so much of my childhood just going to school, coming home, reading books. Like that was my daily routine. And yeah, I mean, even I think going back to like before high school, just like my childhood, I think it would have been nicer to have more of like a social, like a richer social life outside of the school day. Like literally just went straight home every single day and read books for like 3 or 4 hours, after finishing my homework. Like that's how I would spend like every day, and yeah, as a result, like when I go home or like even when I went home to Japan when my family was still living there, I would have only like maybe one friend from middle school that I would hang out with. And I just didn't have that like richer set of connections that like grounded me. Like, for example, my sister, she did karate. So she took like karate classes and like, I don't know if she was super close friends with them, but she had this activity that was outside of our international school bubble, with people who are just local people from the neighborhood, and so I didn't have anything like that. I didn't want to challenge myself. I didn't want to push myself out of that comfort zone. I briefly thought about it. Oh, it'd be cool to like know how to do martial arts, but I don't want to put myself out of the comfort zone and like joining this whole club and going through all the training and all of that. I just want to stay at home and, read a book or play games or whatever. Yeah. So I think in terms of like early childhood and high school, a lot of it was in terms of, I mean, I guess how would I know, right? At that time, it's only in hindsight that you look back, right? Hindsight is 2020. But looking back, I think I would advise someone in that situation to try to branch out more, not care so much about these external markers, realize that connections really, really matter. Having special and unique experiences and not just being sort of flattered, being affirmed by people, but like developing your own inner self a lot more is super important. And then in high school, yeah, I mean, part of it might be just a fundamental thing about boarding schools and like prep schools, right? We talked about this in the episode with Andy, but just how much of it is about status. Sometimes it is hard to avoid. I do think about just that sort of culture. There's so many great things about it. There's so many amazing ways that you meet people, and being really in that residential community at a young age is very special. But also, people, you can't really escape that feeling like everyone is aware of what's happening to you, and you have like social status to think about, even if it's not true, even if it's not true that everyone's thinking about you. Right? It sort of feels that way. You're scared of being judged or whatever. So yeah, I think the other thing I might add just on that final point is being willing to admit your own flaws and weaknesses and asking for help. Like, I think I felt this like deep sense of fear or shame at asking for help or admitting that I didn't know something or being perceived as weak or struggling. I wanted to sort of flex and flaunt the fact that I was doing well and thriving.
All of this is so relatable. Yeah.
And I think like I never crossed my mind to sort of ask for therapy or, talk to people other than my like closest friends about struggles that I was going through.
So you did open up to your close friends.
I think some of my close friends I did, but in this sort of way that's like not super healthy, where you just kind of want them to, you want to sort of dump it on someone.
Right.
And then
and you
all
want
you're
them to
expecting,
agree. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All I wanted in return was for them to just be like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. I wanted sympathy. I wanted pity. I wanted, I wanted them to feel for me. But of course they're limited in how much they can feel for me. Right. They have their own stuff going on. Right. They're not a professional. They don't have the skills or the experience to point out this is a problematic pattern. You need to think about this a bit more objectively. You need to bring reason to this. You never end up really fully happy in that situation because you're in high school. You're pouring your heart out maybe, and you just want to hear back, oh, man, that sucks. Like the world is so cruel to you. I can't. And you want to be affirmed in that. Like even in your struggle, you want to be affirmed in someone validating you, right? But of course, they're not going to see it in the exact same way that you do. Whereas like a professional or like an older person or some other kind of mentor figure might have been able to bestow a bit more of like a detached sense of wisdom.
Yeah.
But I didn't do that. I didn't really take advantage of those resources. I don't think I had like a close relationship with any like adults really on a super close level.
Even like dorm advisors, no.
Not really dorm advisors, no. Yeah, so I think that's another thing. And I think that sort of set the stage. I mean, it was basically the same in college. I didn't have. Yeah. I just sort of continued that pattern on. So
let's talk about college.
Yeah. Let's hear from you first.
College. I think socially, I think college was fine. Not to be facetious, I would have consumed less alcohol. But maybe college is the right time to drink. I don't know.
Let's take a look at your liver.
Yeah, my
I'm just
liver.
kidding.
Yeah. It was. College, I definitely have less regrets, and also, it was just tough, right? I think one thing that I'm very proud of was coming back from service after the 2 year long hiatus and like trying my best to like meet friends and like make relationships and stuff. I mean, I kind of similar to what Thomas was talking about, like coming back from college, like I didn't try to have like a chip on my shoulder, right? Like, oh, I'm older than the rest of my class. I know better. Like I am better than this. I've seen real stuff in the world, so I'm not gonna like hang out with these guys and like worry about these little things. No, like I seriously consider myself as like a class of 20, and I'm very proud of myself. But that I think I learned a lot from the regrets in high school, right? So I think that's an example of me like trying to learn from my regrets and really just letting my guards down and try to be less worried about how I'm perceived by others, right? Because I had a lot of moments where I would go to parties and like people are like, "Who are you?" I've never seen you before,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like in high school, thinking about who I was in high school, that would have killed me. I'm like, "Oh, I'm not gonna go to these parties where nobody knows me." It's like, no, you gotta like just show up. You gotta like make friends, right? Like go beyond the first 2 seconds of awkwardness, and then these guys are open to hang out, they're open to learn about you, who you are, and learn about your experiences. So I think that stuff was good. And I'm again, this is why I'm kind of glad that I had these regrets in high school that I could sort of use to change my actions. But having said that, I think again what I would do differently is just try out more clubs. um, I had this like for the longest time I was fully convinced that I would like just go work for a government, whether it be a US government or like a Korean government. So like I was really involved in this Rockefeller Center, which is like a center for like all government related stuff in college, right? But I didn't try out anything else, right? Like I would have tried out more like CS related stuff. I would have tried out more STEM related stuff, right? Like for example, going to like I don't know CS coding events, like hackathons and stuff like that. Like because you can participate even if you're not a coder, right? I had a lot of coder friends around me, but I had a lot of like ideas. I could have tried to build something from it. But that's another example of like I let my time in high school, like like math club for example, I was like I sort of convinced myself that like that's not my path, like right, I'm a more humanities guy, like I'm not a math STEM person. Don't define yourself from one experience. That's another piece of advice that I would give to people. Just because you failed at one thing in a certain environment, right, doesn't mean doesn't mean that that's your destiny. Doesn't mean that that's your path. Um, yeah. So I would have tried out more clubs, more activities. What else? What else? But I think I lived a very busy life in college. I lived a very busy life.
Yeah, what
So,
were you involved in?
oh man, so a lot of things. I tried out boxing, and boxing became like one of my like favorite sports. I mean, obviously, it's hard to do boxing like here, like right, because you would have to go to the gym, and it's a big time commitment and stuff like that. With my work hours, it's just been tough. But I still try to go every once in a while and like go to these like calisthenics like boxing classes. It's fun. And I was an international students mentor in college, so it's like again like from my experience of trying to assimilate to the US culture in high school, like I wanted to be somebody that if there's a guy that is having troubles with similar experiences, they could come to me and ask for advice, right? I wanted to become that mentor. And then I was pretty like involved in other social groups. Oh, and then like the Korean Students Association, that was also a big, I think, part of me, I think, in college. I didn't hold like an exec position or anything like that, but just kind of like having more Korean, friends around me, kind of like reconnecting with my culture, that mattered a lot to me. I think that was good. Yeah, I was just like very busy. So I don't have a ton of regrets. But Thomas, I want to hear a little bit about you.
Okay. No, thanks for sharing.
Of course, of course.
So I think for me, I'll try to not go on and on and on, but I do think I have to break it up into maybe a few different categories. I think one might be just social. Like,
Yeah.
I think I regret never really taking the time to learn how to make friends.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds kind of weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, I do think it's a skill to
Mm-hmm.
like make friends and
It is.
keep friends and sort of nurture friendships.
Mm-hmm.
I think in high school, it's small enough that you can kind of avoid this, where the classes are small, right? At least at our high school, like every class only had like 12 people. You know, there's 300 people in your like grade, and you have dorms. So you sort of have all these mechanisms by which you'll inevitably get to know people to some degree. And there's a lot of required activities, right? In high school, I would say that's like one of the biggest differences between high school and college is that a lot of things in high school are required. You have to be there. And then once college hits, it's like suddenly almost nothing is required. Right?
There's no
like,
forcing function.
you could literally skip every class. Like, it's not, no one's going to come and knock on your door and tell you to go to that class, right? And like dorm activities, right? Like in high school, we had this, like, what was it called? Like Community Action Day or something? No,
Academy Life Day.
Academy Life Day. We had
Yeah.
Academy Life Day and
Something else
something
too.
community thing. And like these are things that you have to do with your dorm. You know, your presence is mandated. You know, again, not that independence and freedom is a bad thing, but it's sort of you do have to take up that slack of you have to take on the responsibility of planning your own life and being independent. And when you're 18 and you've never done that before and you're used to things just sort of being planned out for you, it's hard. And I think other people just kind of, I mean, everyone, this isn't like a me specific thing, right? Everyone sort of has to figure this out at some point. But I do think it's hard for a lot of people, and I know it was hard for me. Especially my first year in college, I was in a single, which I thought was amazing at first, right? I was like, oh, this is so nice. I have a single. The reason I got a single is that I requested one for like quote unquote medical reasons because I grind my teeth at night. And I was like self-conscious that like my roommate would be like yelling at me for like grinding my teeth at night. I mean, now I just have like a Invisalign like retainer, so it like doesn't make as much of a noise. It's like not even really an issue. Like there are sort of solutions to this problem, but I was like so I guess concerned about what people would think of me, and I didn't want to deal with that. I was like so self-conscious about that that I didn't want to share a room with anyone. But as a result, I think I saw that in the first semester even. Like there's so many events that, you know, you're new to campus and people go with their roommates. Like that's your default group of friends at the beginning of the year. And I was so Princeton has these residential colleges, and you know, I was in a residential college where it's not uncommon for there to be like 6 people in a room or 8 people in a room. It's like a suite style. So like there were people who had like an 8-room suite where they become very close within their room, and they're still friends like 10 years later. In fact, I was just talking to someone who was in that situation where they're like 2 of their best friends are people that they roomed with freshman year of college, you know, 2014. And I just had a single. So I think like letting that self-consciousness get in the way of like being more extroverted and social is sort of a regret. I think also just being more intentional about reaching out to people. Like you meet someone at an event, right? Like, and trying to actually make a proactive effort to get to know them better instead of just, oh, maybe I'll see you again at one of these things. But like, no, like, let's go grab a meal. Let's go do this. Like persistently inviting people to stuff. You know, not in like a creepy way, but just, you know, a few times might not be enough. They might be busy, but like not giving up and trying to organize stuff. I think I was just pretty passive on that front. I would let other friends organize things and I would just kind of tag along if I heard about it. But because I didn't have a roommate, it's like I didn't necessarily organically latch on to as many things. So I think I just remember first year of college being quite lonely because I did almost everything by myself. Like I didn't like organize my schedule to take classes with my friends. So like most of the classes I took, I was just going to and from by myself. I did make like a good study group friend, like a friend group through studying for my multivariable calculus class. So some of those people I'm actually still friends with, which is nice. Yeah. But in fact, I was recently last summer I was visiting Stanford for my sister's graduation, and I met up with a PSET friend from like the first semester of college. So that was nice. Who's at Stanford now. But yeah. So I think just like being more intentional about that. I think the reason some people struggle is that this just comes more easily to some people than to others. Like if you're extroverted, it probably doesn't feel very tough to just like spontaneously suggest things.
Yeah.
You know, it's not draining for you to send all those messages and reach out to people. But if you're more introverted, it is kind of hard to get over that activation energy barrier. You might just be like, I'm just going to stay in my room today. Or, you know, I'm just going to go to this event, but I'll just sort of grab some food and leave. or I'm going to go to this talk, but I'll just kind of sit in the back and, I'm not going to introduce myself to the people sitting next to me, And there's those like little choices, and maybe they sort of compound, right? Like that sort of
They
over
definitely
time,
compound.
it just there builds up this resistance to doing that. And if you don't practice it, and if you don't see the value and the importance in it, then you're not going to do it. And I think I just got myself into that habit of being within sort of my own little bubble and not reaching out as much. I think the other thing is like just popularity, right? Like certain people are just more popular than others, and that goes into a lot of things. If you're in a sports team, if you're, good looking, if you're, well connected in other ways, if you have, if you're rich. At Princeton, this was a big thing, right? Like people, wealth and status kind of were in some ways conspicuous sometimes.
Like your family's wealth? Like people
it's
talk
not like
about
people want to be friends with you just because they know you're rich, but like being rich
They'll
does
talk about it.
Certain eating clubs, for example, like you might be more likely to join certain eating clubs if you're wealthy, or have access to doing fun things over spring break or whatever. Whatever. So I do think there's many factors that go into popularity.
Yeah.
But like if you're popular, it means that you don't have to do that much to plan things, because things will just sort of pop up and you'll be naturally invited to things. Whereas if you're like not popular, then no one's going to be like reaching out to you, right? So you have even more of a sort of need to sort of be proactive and set up your own social calendar, so to speak, right? But actually it's usually those same people who kind of, it's self-compounding, right? It's sort of just, you end up in this self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, I'm not like, I don't have a lot of friends. I'm not very popular. People don't like me. I'm lonely. So why even bother reaching out?
It's a vicious cycle.
So I do think, realizing that, okay, there are some just realities that you're not, there's no way to become like the most popular person. And it's not even like, that shouldn't even be a goal, right? Like it's not really a worthy or interesting goal to try to become like popular for the sake of popularity. But I do think putting in more effort to cultivate those deep friendships is something I wish I'd done.
Also, sorry, just one quick note that I want to make is I don't want to come off as like we're equating being an introvert and having these like I'm gonna just be by myself tonight moments with laziness. It's not, right?
It's like, not laziness.
It's like being an introvert, like it's actually tough, right? Because your mind's like you're actually going through like this mental agony, even if you're like by yourself, right? Because it's like, it's by choice, but it's not really by choice, right? Because if you're an introvert, right? I've definitely had a lot of those moments in high school, and like looking back, like it definitely requires, although it is a small thing, but it definitely requires like an unlock, right? That it's like, oh, it's okay. It's like, it's okay to reach out. Like you're not like losing by being the first person to reach out to somebody, right? Like you don't have to be always like you don't have to feel good about other people like reaching out to you first. So it's like, oh man, like, I'm like, okay, I'll tag along because you want my presence sort of thing. Like I think I definitely like had those, moments. Yeah. And looking back, that's so childish, It's like, just reach out, change those, oh, let's grab a meal and then never, reach out moments to like, just be the person who say like, hey, let's actually set up a time and like do it. And I mean, you've clearly learned from all these experiences, because I mean, our listeners should know that Thomas hosts a lot of events now, right?
Yeah, but I think that's exactly why I like to do that now. Is because exactly for the reasons you're saying. It took time to sort of learn the value in that. And, now that I'm in a position where I sort of know what I'm looking for, I know what kind of events, I'm not a big like go out to the clubs and party. Like I like having gatherings, potluck dinners, people over for drinks, smaller crowds of like, 5 to 10 people. Like that's sort of my sweet spot. That's what I like. I know what I want. When I meet people, I love meeting new people. I think I also can sort of quickly identify, not in the sense of like, oh, I can identify I'm going to be friends or not with this person, but you get that sense of like, this is someone that I really click with and I want to get to know them better. So even if I don't know them super well, like I definitely want to try to invite them to more things. And I mean this in just like a platonic way, right? But like you meet some friends and you're like, okay, wow, like I joined a running club, for example, right? And there's a lot of people I know from running club who like I love seeing at running club and they're great, but I kind of know we're not like going to be friends on a deeper level. But then I sometimes will meet someone where I'm like, okay, wow, we like really we clicked, we like had a good conversation. I want to hang out with this person, outside of just running, things like that. So I love hosting things now because I feel like it's a chance for me to act on some of these principles that took me a long time and frankly a lot of loneliness and tough times to sort of acquire these lessons, these life lessons. So Yeah.
It sounds like you learned a lot from it. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
wouldn't like necessarily. Right. It's like going back to that idea of, these
Yeah.
regrets are things that I learned from. And
Yeah.
I would try to impart that advice to a younger version of myself.
Yes.
Right. So especially now as an RA, I feel like I have an
Right.
opportunity to talk to
Right.
kids who are like literally in that same position
Same
in the first
position,
few
yeah.
months of college. But yeah, I do think you learn through the mistakes. Having that openness to learn, having that growth mindset, I do think is very important. I think not shutting down, not getting stuck into that vicious cycle is very important. But
These kids are lucky to have you as a RA, man.
Thanks. But yeah, do you any other commentary on that? I mean,
On school, no. Yeah, social life, no. I think that's beautifully
okay.
put.
Yeah, so I have some other thoughts about college, or it's
Yeah.
not really about college in particular.
Mhm.
I think it's just like another regret I have from that phase in my life.
Mhm.
But
Let's talk about it.
so I think it's like maybe they're related, right? But I think especially when you're in that sort of vulnerable state,
Yeah.
where you don't have a lot of friends, you're having trouble finding a community. You'll sort of latch on to the first group of people that
Yeah.
you feel a connection with, or that you feel safe with in some way.
Yeah.
And I do feel like in college, there's this tendency for groups to become a little bit insular. Like we sort
Like
of
freshman
latch onto a
posses?
group. You become,
Yeah.
it's sort of posse-like, or
Yeah.
tribalistic might be too strong of a word, but insular I think is a good way to put it. Right? You're
Yeah.
just sort of inward facing. It's a bit of like okay, these are my people, but like outside, I don't really care so much.
Right.
And I do think that happened to me as well. So it's not like I stayed in this sort of, I don't know what to do for like ever in college. But so we talked about this in an earlier episode, right? The episode on religion and spirituality. But like in college, I did get involved in a Catholic student group. I was raised Catholic, and I was like, okay, this is a group that I have something in common with. Let me start attending the events and all of this. And again, like, no, there's nothing wrong. Like, I'm not trying to hate on this group or anything. But I do think that it sort of made me in some way, and this is more of a me thing, but finding that community that I have this one thing in common with, I sort of just latched onto that as like almost like a badge of like an identity marker. And then in some ways that inhibited me from, I guess, reaching out, or sort of what you were describing, right? Wanting to join a lot of different things and make friends from many different walks of life. I think it sort of inhibited me from that. And I think I mainly started to, okay, I have this strong community here. It's tight knit. We share a lot of, things in common. And I sort of projected my desire for friendship and community onto this too much. And it's just one community. And I think no one community can fully, I guess, satisfy you or give you a complete outlet, right? It's good and healthy, especially when you're in college, to be meeting people from different kinds of backgrounds, different viewpoints.
Walks of life, yeah.
And I think in some sense, I just got trapped in this little bubble, or I trapped myself in this little bubble where, I would see someone's, religious identity or cultural identity and be like, okay, I can be friends with this person, but, I don't have enough in common with this other person.
Oh,
which
really?
when you think about it is kind of crazy, right? Because it's like on one level, sure.
That's very unlike you, first of all. I mean, unlike the you that I know now.
Yeah. So I think, I that's why it's a regret, I guess. But I think I was like wanting that community. And so when I found something, I was like, oh, this must be it. And then that sort of made me close-minded in a certain way. And I think I missed out on a lot of opportunities to have friendships or connections that sort of cross those lines. And it's interesting because on one level, sure, I had this like one aspect of my identity in common with people in this group, but like not other aspects, right? It's not like, okay, because they have the same religion
it's a
growing
great
up,
point. Yeah.
it's like that doesn't mean that they understand anything about my background.
Yeah.
Right? And in many ways, people that I met from this one society, this one like group, it's like one sliver, one cross section of society. But what about the parts of me that aren't feeling fully at home there, right?
Right. It's just one facet of
it's one
you,
facet, yeah. And people are, multifaceted.
Exactly.
Again, like people, I met some really awesome people through this group. I also met some not so, awesome people. I don't want to say anyone is not awesome. Everyone's awesome. But you know what I mean? Like, I think I met some people there that I still really stay in touch with, did form a deep friendship with. And then I met a lot of people that I also think the relationship was extremely superficial. It was just like we both had this one facet in common. We saw each other at a lot of events because we would go to these same events. And But other than that, like there wasn't really that deep connection, and I wasn't spending as much time as I could sort of expanding my horizons or being open minded. Like, I think, you know, okay, I don't want to imply that I didn't have friends from outside this community, but I think there was a period, it probably like peaked maybe during like my sophomore year, so kind of like rebounding from this first year of being pretty lonely and not having any community, second year finding more, like fitting more into this one community, and then letting that sort of take over and become like a big part of my identity. And then I think in my like third and fourth years I kind of got a bit more, I don't know if jaded is the right word, but I think I just got a bit disillusioned that, okay, this is not actually going to be the be all end all. Like there's way more to the experience of life and of college than just finding people who have one thing in common with you. It shouldn't be this like us versus them mentality. One of the best things I did was joining Outdoor Action. I think I talked about this at some point, but it's like the outdoors orientation and like wilderness training group at Princeton. So I would like lead these outdoor action trips every fall for incoming students. I would lead training trips. And then throughout the semester, we would have meetings and events and all kinds of things. So I got to meet a group of people that I never would have met otherwise. And then every year I'm meeting these incoming students. So it feels almost like, you know, what I'm doing now in my RA role, but I'm meeting students who are in that same vulnerable position of coming into college. And they just come from so many different backgrounds and different walks of life. And I'm getting to have this like very deep and meaningful relationship with a group of people away from technology, away from distractions, just like in the wilderness. You know, some of my closest friends from college I made through doing Outdoor Action.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm so glad that I found something that sort of pulled me out of my bubble, so to speak, or encouraged me to meet people in just this alternative way. And also like taught me a lot of just practical skills about social dynamics, emotional intelligence. Like part of the training for being a leader is not just your wilderness skills. It's not just your medical skills. It's also your social skills and how to facilitate conversations, how to diffuse tensions when you can feel that conversations are getting, or conflict is arising, how to be a leader and instill confidence in a group, how to, you know, monitor people who are having issues and check in on them and sort of be proactive. Like so many useful skills that I used as a teacher, that I use as an RA, came from this group. So I just want to say, I guess, that one of my regrets is not doing more of that. Like not, I don't know. Just college is a busy time. You're obviously stressed with all kinds of classes and other stuff. But I think if I could just go back and give my younger self that piece of advice, I would say like focus on learning how, like, first of all, like what you want, you know yourself, right? Know what you're looking for, and be like practice and spend effort and time on developing those skills so that you can make meaningful friendships, so that you're not easily discouraged by those genuinely tough moments of hardship, of loneliness, and that you don't give up, and that you keep trying. You take it upon yourself to, you know, keep reaching out, keep building that community, you know, whatever it looks like. You know, one of the things I really love now is having a group of friends that is not sort of all united around one thing. It's just like the what we are. Like I feel like my extended friend group is just people who like each other and care about each other. And there's no like one thing that you have to be part of the group. Like you don't have to belong to a certain religion or race.
Yeah,
or
that's a
national background
important
or
point,
company or or major or whatever. Like it's just that
you can
like,
be you.
You can be you, yeah. And I just really, really like that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Come as you are. You know, that was the motto of my fraternity.
Oh my gosh,
come as you are.
the motto of this building that we're in right now is "Be you with us."
Be you with us. Oh, that's cute. That's cute. I love it. I love it. Manish Hall, right?
No.
What is this?
Massey
Hall. Sorry, I don't know why I said Manish. I think Manish is actually the name of one of my company's employees. I love it. I want to revisit the me versus them mentality. Right. When I was listening to your story, Thomas, like I was wondering whether that's almost kind of the core of the problem of the political polarization that's going on right now in the country too. It's like your political affiliation at the end of the day is just one facet. Right, that brings you close to the other group of people. And even when you evaluate a politician, right, it's like that's why like the whole me versus them mentality is so strong that you shy away and you don't confront the cons or the mistakes of the politician you're advocating for. And you only try to look at the good parts, and and the dialogues have become very hostile, right? So this whole me versus them mentality, it's like, shying away from that, and making sure that you understand that it's just one thing that's bringing the people together. There's a lot more to life than just that one facet that right. So it's like just understanding that, keeping a more open-minded attitude towards everything. That's very important.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, good.
I mean, it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds so basic in some ways. Like, of course,
It does, yeah.
but yeah, it's hard
It's like
to
a
practice,
duh
right?
thing, but
Yeah,
it's hard to put into action.
Yeah, it's so easy to get bogged down
Yeah.
into the tribalistic mentality of
Exactly.
like, this is my tribe versus another tribe. And
Yeah.
like, you may have genuine disagreements with people, but a lot of the time, like, those disagreements are not actually as big of a deal as we think they are. Or like, of course, you're going to you disagree with everyone about something, but you can always find some common ground, I would think. I mean, unless it's like some extreme case. And yeah, I don't know. I think like it's fun and exciting to meet people who have a different opinion. As long as there's mutual respect and, yeah, I don't know. Again, I feel like this is sounding just kind of wishy-washy, but I do feel like I got trapped into this thing where I don't know. I felt like because I was part of this one community that was based on religious beliefs, and, we had all our holidays that we celebrated and religious services, and,
Yeah.
it became genuinely hard to
Yeah.
connect to people who didn't
Didn't have
buy
that.
into that,
Yeah.
right? Which is silly because it's not someone's fault that they
Yeah.
like had a different belief system or
Yeah.
different culture or whatever, and
Yeah.
you have so much to learn. And it's like, it's not even like the people that were within that community cared especially, about me as a person outside of that
sphere.
identity. Like, they may have or they may have not.
Yeah.
But it's not like a good predictor of whether they're going to care about me, right? Like,
Yeah.
there were people outside of that community that I met through like outdoor action, for example, who I felt genuinely cared about me.
Yeah.
And then there were people inside who maybe only knew me in this one facet and didn't
Yeah.
really care about me other than that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, frankly, it became, when I say like it's like a badge of identity, it's just like, okay, what's your alliance? Like, which team are you on?
Yeah.
And it's not actually a deeper thing,
Yeah.
because the deeper thing only comes with the connection, with
Yeah.
really getting to know someone. And, again, not to keep going back to OA, like outdoor action, but, one of the things I really liked about it is because we were away from campus and we were away from distractions, like, we had a chance to have long conversations, or we'd stay up late in the tent and everyone would go around and tell like a deep, vulnerable story about themselves, right? And you have a chance to do that. Now, you wouldn't necessarily stay close friends with like everyone from your orientation trip, but it at least gave you this sense of like, wow, like, this is like a randomly selected group of people, and yet we're able in the space of this one trip to like develop this closeness and develop this genuine bond. And you may or may not sort of maintain that over time, but it sort of feels hopeful. It feels encouraging that you can build connections with people who are so different from yourself. But yeah, especially when you bring in politics, for example, like, I don't know, I remember on campus, I mean, it was a pretty interesting set of years, right? Like, I was in college 2014 to 2018, right? So during that time we had, like the Ferguson protests, Michael Brown shooting, we had Trump being elected, we had a lot of things happen during that time. And I remember campus felt at times like very, I don't know what the right word is, but polarized. Yeah. And, there'd be like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with protests, right? Like, I think it's a good thing to make your voice heard, but there'd be like unproductive conversations. Yeah. Like, there'd be people, like two sides, not like yelling at each other, but just like not engaging in productive dialogue, just trying to make a point about how wrong the other person is.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue it's still going on, right?
Yeah.
Different topics, but still
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, this is good, but I feel like all the common theme of what the regrets that we've been talking about so far is like, it's like almost like a good learning experience. It's not like a lingering sense of like sadness, sorrow, or like, oh, I wish I could have done, like, I wish I just really didn't do that. Right? Does that make sense, Thomas? Like, for example, like, let's say like I did wrong to somebody in the past, and like you just can't change it, or like it's not something that you like learn from it and like change. Like that, it's not that kind of regret, right?
Yeah.
But I do have some moments like that. So I have
okay,
those
let's go
regrets.
For it. Yeah. Things
So
that you
I'm,
actually wish you did.
Yes,
Yeah.
I actually really, really wish I did.
Okay, if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about, I think, so the common theme here is like just be the be your biggest advocate, like advocate for yourself more. I
Mm.
think that's a thing. I mean, I guess you could argue that like I learned from it and putting into action, but like for example like relationship, right? I think my past relationship, I'm being very honest here, because I value honesty, right? I think that's like one of the favorite parts of this podcast, right? Because we just sit down, we like really open up about ourselves, right? I think in terms of relationship, one thing that I regret with one of my past relationships is like, um, I like really let, I wasn't a good partner to this person. Right? I wasn't a good partner to this person when we were in a relationship in college, and a lot of the opinions that I had about her was actually not on my own, right? It was
Mm.
actually just formed by my friends, and that sort of kind of, I guess I can't think of the right word. It like tainted my view of her, right? And
Yeah.
I just like couldn't see things clearly, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, like my friends didn't like her, so like, sh even though she tried, she didn't really feel comfortable, kind of like hanging out with my friends, and like that's one of the biggest qualities that I look for in a partner, right? Like they have to be able to hang out with my friends, right? Because I don't want to be the person who like shuts away from like all of my current friends just because I'm starting a new relationship. But I was just like very not nice to her. I was not fair to her. Just because my friends said XYZ things about her. And also the thing is like I think it kind of goes back to like the whole status sort of thing. Like, oh, she didn't check like certain boxes, right, in the list. Oh, she didn't seem like very interested in like doing the cool stuff or like I don't know, like academics or like certain social groups. It's like I don't know. It's like things like that. Even though I told her that it didn't matter to me, but it did, right?
Mm.
It did. And I just wish I hadn't like ended things like that the way I did. I basically just said like, hey, it's not really working. Let's just like end things
But
here.
you didn't try to fix
But
it.
I didn't really try to fix it. I never really told her what the real problem was. So I think she just left very. I left that relationship leaving her very confused. Right.
Mm.
So there was that past relationship. I still I still remember very fondly of her. But the thing is, I mean, karma's tough, right? And life, things come back to you. So be nice to others.
What does that
Karma
mean?
is science. So I'm going to tell you, my past relationship, I think I was in her, like the roles reversed, right? So
Uh,
my last relationship, my ex was like in my shoes
I
with
see.
that past relationship.
Her friends didn't like you.
Yes. Well, her friends didn't like me. Her parents didn't like me, and always like parents is a tough thing. And I
Yeah.
was also going through some other stuff at that time,
Right.
so I wasn't really fun to hang out with either. But um,
Like the effort to make it work just
the
wasn't
effort to
happening.
make it work just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I think I wasn't really. She didn't leave me confused because I had seen it coming from miles and miles
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
But still, it was just like a shitty way to end the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I have no, feelings left or anything like that. It's just, I think, just from her part, it was just poorly executed, and execution matters so much. Just like honest conversation
Yeah.
matters so much.
So what do you think
in a
you could have done?
relationship.
What could you have done differently?
For this last
Yeah.
last relationship, I would have protected myself more. I would have ended that relationship. So this is another regret that I had. I dragged that relationship on for so long when I knew so clearly in the back of my mind that it just wasn't, we were not a good fit, right?
Yeah.
And I think I still dragged along out of
Why?
some sort of I think I convinced myself that it was loyalty, but it wasn't really a loyalty. I think I was scared to, I think I was scared to be single again.
Okay.
Yeah. And gotta say, like, there are certain moments in life where I'm like, wow, being single is kind of lit. Um, so I don't know why I was so scared to, exit that relationship. But yeah, that's my regret. That's my regret. So yeah, again, my regret is about the relationship in college, right? I
Okay.
was not nice though. So yeah.
Do you feel like now with I don't know. It sounds like you've reflected on this, right? So now do you feel like it puts you, having made some of these regrets, like, does it put you in a better place now, like mentally and like, do you feel like if a relationship were to come along at this moment, you're in a better
I'll be much
headspace to
yeah,
approach it?
I think so. I'll be much better, kind of like I would be better equipped with the right tools. You know what I mean? Maybe that's a weird way to put it, but just like I really do think it's like skills. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's like skills, right? Like for example, like having an honest conversation, like prioritizing relationships, right? Like I feel like I can now definitely multitask my friends and like I can sort of allocate my time, effectively between friends and relationship. But it's all a learning experience, right? You become a better person. Yeah, but also just like looking out for myself. Being honest about my feelings, being honest, like really listen to your inner voice, because your gut feeling, your inner voice sometimes is the best judge of what's actually going on. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on relationship. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really, really interesting because, well, yeah, I do feel like even if a relationship doesn't work out,
Yeah.
hopefully you still learn something valuable.
Yeah.
Right. And so it sounds like, you did. I think, at some points in the past, I had like a maybe perfectionism or something where I felt like, okay, if this is not going to be perfect, it's not even worth
Trying
at all. And that can be a very dangerous mental headspace to be in, right? Because then as soon as you see like an imperfection or you see some little voice saying this isn't going to work, you just give up and you just don't try. But then, as you were saying, on the other hand, right, there is a risk of dragging things on and not just sort of realizing that this is fundamentally not going to work.
This is donezo, yeah.
Yeah, and so being decisive, I think, is important, right? So it makes sense to really reflect deeply and be intentional and say, okay, I think this is, I'm not fully certain, but I at least have enough confidence that I'm going to give this my best shot and give it like 100% effort. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Versus having sort of the decisiveness to say, look, I care about you as a person, but this is not working, and ending it, which is also a very hard conversation to have.
Right.
But yeah, like that, I feel like just requires some level of maturity. Yeah. And it takes time to acquire that. Yeah. And we're all like so scared of, different things, right? Whether it's scared of being single or scared of people judging us or scared of, looking like a fool or scared of communicating and being vulnerable and just talking about your feelings. Right. Trying to practice that now. Trying to practice actually, I don't know, just like being vulnerable, like having like communication skills, right? Yeah. Like, you can just get into this inertia zone where you're just status quo.
I love that inertia zone.
You're just it's just a status quo. Yeah. You don't really try to shake it up at all. Yeah. You don't try to get real. You don't try to address the elephant in the room. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, I'm sorry. I'm going to go one more.
Yeah, go for it.
If that's okay. So this theme of just inertia thing. So career. I want to talk about jobs and career too. One of my biggest regrets of my first job is really not advocating for myself more, right? Like looking out for myself. So it's like, if you do XYZ things, I think I talked about this in the job and career episode too. I don't know if this is like an Asian culture thing or something like that. It's like, don't prioritize being polite so much. Don't care so much about that, especially in like a job environment. Like, you got to tell your boss and you got to tell your team, like, if you're doing something, if you're really burning the midnight oil on something, like, let them know. Right? They might like try to discount you, just like dismiss your efforts, but don't be the first one to dismiss your own efforts. Right? Yeah. And don't discourage yourself from like communicating how hard you're working on something. So it's like, for example, the reason this is so relevant right now and very timely for me is like, I today had a pretty important question with my boss in terms of promotion. Not a lot of my I don't think my boss listens to this, so it's okay. But I've sort of been kind of struggling with this in my mind for a long time, right? Because I'm now working with a boss of mine who is fantastic. I love him, but he has been going on pat leave. So he divided up his pat leave into 2 chunks. He took the first 3 weeks like a month ago. I was dying that month. I think you know this. Like I was in the office like working or like at home always online for about a month. Right? I didn't have a day off. And then now starting next week he's going on pat leave again, right? as he should. He should definitely he should go on the pat leave. But I mean, it just puts me in a tough spot, right? So I was definitely I think I was just really punching above my weight class a little bit here. But I am so like I'm actually a really, really shy person at work in weird ways. I get along very well with my coworkers, but I have trouble having these kind of conversations about oh, I want a raise, I want a promotion, I did X, Y, and Z, so I want to be treated fairly, right? So after months and months of internally struggling with it, I had a conversation with my boss finally today, right? And then I was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest with you. This might be a tough conversation. Do you have the appetite right now to have this conversation? I asked him that first. And he was like, I appreciate you asking that. Let's just have it. You clearly have something going on in your head.
Yeah.
And then after sort of setting the tone that way, I was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest with you. You promised me XYZ things. I think it's time for me to ask for that, right? So he was like, oh, I was planning on, I had this plan for you towards the end of this year, in my mind, is that okay? And I was like I would have normally shied away from it. I would have been like, oh yeah. It's go overboard and say you're so happy about whatever they're suggesting to you, just because you feel like that's being polite. And I hate confrontation, right? I'm so non-confrontational. But for some reason at that moment I was like, man, I gotta get out of this cycle, right? I gotta just ask more, right? I gotta demand. Sometimes you just gotta be demanding. So I'm like, hey, I just want a clearer date. I just want I just want it to happen sooner. And then he was actually surprisingly very receptive. So I mean, that conversation alone, I mean, none of it really, it will still take time for all of that to come into fruition, and I need more concrete dates and stuff like that. It's in the works, but he would have not known, right, had I not brought it up. And it's not necessarily a problem of him having bad intentions or anything. It's more being more direct in communications and stuff like that. But the reason I'm sorry, I'm going a little long with the story here, but the point that I'm trying to make is the same thing could have been applied to this last relationship that I was talking about, right? I didn't have to be so oh, I'm okay with everything that you're doing. Oh, you're feeling unhappy today, so I'll just, let you not talk to me for a week. I would have done a better job of drawing boundaries, right? And just hey, we need to talk. What is the problem? And I think you're treating me unfairly about XYZ things, so we need to change. If you can't do that, then our expectations are not aligned, and I can't compromise, these things. It's just drawing boundaries, even when it comes to relationship, jobs, and I know we're going to talk about family too. The closer you are to somebody, the more important it is to draw these clear boundaries and just advocate for yourself.
No, thanks for sharing. And I'm really glad that you had that conversation.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was just today, you were saying?
That was
okay, good for you.
A few hours ago.
Yeah, because it's tough to just speak up for yourself. I don't know. I do feel like sometimes there's this culture of oh yeah, you just got to speak up for yourself. But it's what does that actually mean? How do you do it? How do you do that in a way that's feels authentic and respectful? You still want to be a respectful person. You want to maintain the relationship. You don't want to just be always demanding. But it's also fair to express and communicate what's going on your side. So I think you handled that super well, or at least, I don't know. We'll see, but good luck. Yeah. No, I'm really glad that your boss was receptive. Trying to think. I don't have that much job experience. I mean, I'm a grad student. That's my job. But I think the same things kind of apply, right? If you feel really stressed about stuff that's going on, you can be direct and say, look, can I have a conversation, a serious conversation? And sometimes just front loading that and saying okay, letting the person calibrate and set the expectations accordingly so that they're not just blindsided, right? It's helpful, right? You can sort of schedule a time when you know that you're both going to be fully mentally present rather than just sort of popping in at a bad time. I see this sometimes with, I don't know, when I was a teacher, for example, you need to have these tough conversations. And you need to not let your ego get in the way, but you do want to stand up for what you believe in.
That's so important, not so letting your ego get in the way.
So it's you want to say what you believe is right because it's right. and not because you don't want to get into like an ego battle. So I mean, I felt this sometimes with like students that you're teaching. You know, you want what's best for both of you. We're on the same team here, right? But you don't want it to become about your ego. Same with like talking to like a student's parents, right? It's like, you know, the parents might just want their kid to go from like a B+ to an A- or something. And, you know, you want to make it clear that like, look, we both are on the same team here. We both care about your kid, like learning. That's what we care about. But it's not about like my personal vendetta against your kid. It's not about like, I'm not doing this because I don't like your kid. Like, you know, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I
you're
think
not. You're
these
not.
general skills of how to have those difficult conversations is important. Speaking up for yourself. Yeah, I like it. Cool. All right.
Good. That leaves us with family. Is there anything that you want to cover with family? I have some stuff, but Thomas, I've been talking a lot, so
I've been talking a lot too. So no, go ahead.
I can go. I mean, like family. I mean, again, hindsight 2020, right? So it's tough, but if I had to choose one piece of advice to give to anyone who's going through family troubles, and we had a upbringing episode too, so I won't repeat myself so much here, but and I also want to caveat that there are certain relationships in families where it's just bad people. You got to stay away from it, right? You got to escape. You got to get out of there. But oftentimes there are some, not to generalize, but many times it's through miscommunications and like misunderstanding, right? One big unlock for me again was, and therefore like the regret that I have is like not trying to view my parents as like trying to understand that my parents were children at a certain point in their lives as well, right? Like they went through that stuff too, like, and that it's their first time parenting their child too, right? Like I think that's like my biggest regret, like holding them to a standard that's almost a little too tough. We often talk a lot about how parents hold their kids, especially Asian parents, to like ridiculous standards, and it's true. But I think also kids sort of have to kind of step back and like realize that oftentimes these parents have a lot of good intentions. And yeah, the execution might be very, very poor. And in that case, again, like you might have to ask for help. But just ask yourself if it's something that can be, if you can change your mindset, the way you perceive the dynamics, right? I'm trying to think of a good concrete example because I feel like I'm just rambling a little bit here, but I don't know. Let's say that your mom, like, let's say that there is something that you don't really quite understand why, but just really gets your parents mad, right?
Yeah.
Just ticks them off, like just one minor thing, right? Then yeah, like it's easy to just think of them as crazy, right? That's just like my classic mom behavior, and just like not try to understand them. But again, like just just change your perception, change your attitude just a little bit, and try to understand like what would have made my mom act that way, what would have made my dad act that way. And it's like, I don't know, just like ask around, like what was mom like when she was a child, what was dad like when he was a child. Like having those kind of conversations matter because you then understand them as a person, not as a parent. And that's so important in family dynamics, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's a regret that I have because I honestly had like about a year when, before I left for high school, about a year when I would just not talk to my mom. I would just come home and just like go straight to my room. I would talk to my dad, and I mean, God, my dad is great guy. He was just like he was like kind of like a messenger between me and my mom. It was rough, rough times for me, but for my family. But yeah, it's a big regret.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
It is hard because you're a kid too, right?
Yeah,
so it's like, how are you supposed to know, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes you just look back and you're like, oh man, there was such a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that fall into this category. Like you look back and you're like, man, what a missed opportunity. If only I had done this differently. If only I had known. Right. If only someone had told me. Right. And I do think a lot of the burden of that does lie on people who are more experienced and older, right? Like you got to be the more, like if you're the parent in the relationship, like more of the burden does fall on you to communicate and to set those expectations accordingly. But I love what you said about like realizing that your parents are human and your parents were children too at one point. So you know, you can't hold them to like an impossibly high standard
Yeah.
either. You know, they all have their own baggage in
Right.
different ways, that things that they may, you know, have seen or experienced as normal in their upbringing, and
Right.
you know, taking that all into account as additional just context on everything that they do, I think is helpful. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing again. I think on my end, I mean, there's various things I could say. I think, you know, one thing is like maybe similar. I think as a kid, I would sometimes get frustrated with my parents and then not communicate about it. I would just have some angsty phases where I would go into my room and I had a journal, and I would just sort of go on very angsty, long journal rants to myself, which is like, I'm kind of glad I have them still now and
Yeah.
can look back, but it's not always the most productive. I think I could have just talked to my parents more.
You're such a nice guy.
What?
You put out your anger by going to your room and writing journals. Now just straight up yell back at my mom.
That's fine. Yeah, but yeah, everyone handles it
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
I think another thing is like, I don't know, like, yeah, I don't know what the right way to approach it is, but how to be like more vulnerable, or like more emotionally vulnerable. We talked about this also in like the mental health episode, right? But I think I did just see this like sense of shame with talking about like personal stuff
Yeah.
in front of my family members.
Mm.
It's like, oh, I shouldn't be showing so much emotion. I think like very much
Oh, really?
sort of in that sort of kind of like what might be called like toxic masculinity, like, you know, boys don't cry kind of thing. I have to be like stoic and all of this. But I also think it's the fact that I went to boarding school before I really had any serious like emotional drama in my life. Like, sure, I got angsty and wrote in my journal in middle school, but you know, I went to high school and I've been, you know, living away from my parents for, you know, since I was 14. And at that point, right, it's not like they're ever even they're not around me most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what, I only see my parents during the summers and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe a couple weeks at Christmas. So, yeah, like in many ways, I think that made me just grow up apart from my family, right? It's like it's not that I don't love my family. Like, of course I love them, but
Yeah.
they just didn't really see me grow up in my formative years.
Yeah.
They just weren't there,
Right.
right? And I wasn't there with them.
Right.
So I think there are just things about my experience there that I felt like almost an insurmountable gap of I can't really talk about what's going on because they have no context to understand this, and it's just too much. It's too complicated, you know. So I'm not going to get into it. I'm just going to say everything's okay. Yeah. I think that's one. I think another thing is like with older generations, so like grandparents stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, so all my grandparents are now dead, which definitely makes you think like, wow, you know, there's always that sense of missed opportunity of like, you know, you only have your grandparents in your life for a limited amount of time. I mean, I never even knew my grandfather. He died before I was born. And then, you know, my other grandparents, I wouldn't say I was very close to any of them. And then, yeah, like even on my mom's side, like even though I lived in Japan for, you know, 12 years, you know, in the same city as my Japanese grandma, like, I don't know, at no point were we really close. Right. And then, you know, we moved from Japan in 2015 and she passed away in, you know, not this past April, but 2023. And so, yeah, it's like between those, like 8 years or so, saw her once, I think, you know, during the last 8 years.
That's a real regret.
Yeah.
Because you can't change that.
You can't take that back.
Yeah, you can't take that back.
Yeah.
Time's gone by. Man. Yeah, it's like sand flowing through your fingers. Just can't catch it back.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other
regrets
regrets to add to our list?
No, I really don't. I mean, I wish I could have shared more concrete examples, but I mean, I tried my best. I think I want to end on this one note about just taking a step back and regret as a thing and as a concept. That's, I think what I've realized while discussing, you know, this topic with you, Thomas, is that like, it's like the real regrets are the ones that you can't use to empower yourself and make yourself better, huh? Like even even like the regrets that we talked about in school, like exploring more, that was one of the common themes. And like for me, job and career, like advocating for, like, you know, speaking up for myself more, like that stuff, those are all actionable items that I can just, you know, be more conscious about now, right? But the kind of regrets, like like for example, like you and your grandparents, right? Like that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
you
It's
can't
like
really undo that.
yeah, you
or-
can't undo, or like you can't change the future. You can't use the wisdom that you gathered from that past experience to change the future, right? That's a
Right,
real
it's kind of
regret.
irreversible.
Irreversible. Yeah, that's a real regret.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, right. I like to think that a lot of the other regrets that I talked about are things that, caused me to suffer perhaps unnecessarily for some time, right? Like if I had known differently, if I had been wiser, if I had been more proactive, if I had been X, Y, or Z, I could have avoided suffering. I could have avoided inflicting suffering. I could have not damaged certain relationships or friendships. I could have done a lot of things differently.
Right.
But yeah, I like to think that a lot of those things are still reparable. Like I still have a chance to learn from that and repair any damage that's been done. And but certain things maybe are just, it's too late, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can still learn, but maybe you have to apply it in a new context,
Right.
not the same context.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is sad. It's sobering, but I mean, it's also life. Like time only goes one way, So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
What is life without regrets, man?
Wow.
Good.
Deep
Well
stuff.
done.
All
Good
right.
stuff.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah. No.
Thanks
thank
for
you,
thanks
too.
for engage. I forget whose idea this was, but I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we talked about
Likewise.
regrets.
Likewise.
Yep. Alrighty.
All right.
Signing
well,
out for now.
Signing off for now. We'll come back next week with a new topic, but until then, take care.
Adios.
Bye.